Accessibility is a hard topic to talk about because no matter how I feel, I'm going to offend someone and anger others. But why are we talking about this now? Well, I just completed Sekiro, 4 playthroughs and every achievement unlocked. When I went to boast about this to some friends, me and one of them got into an argument about how Sekiro isn't accessible to players like him. He loves the world, the aesthetic, and the characters, but due to the hard difficulty, he is unable to beat it, or even beat a mini-boss. However, I think it's better if we go over the history of video games and the accessibility that came with them. Video games have been around since basically Pong. Now, for the purposes of this video, Pong doesn't help us, so let's fast forward to the arcade cabinets, and no, not computer space. The first one I really want to talk about is Pac-Man. Pac-Man was the first of many arcade cabinets that only had one difficulty, but the further you got, the harder it got. Back then, the only way you knew if you were the best in the area was to put your initials into the cabinet after you have done your absolute best. But for some people that didn't matter, it was just fun to play games, you didn't have to be the best. The arcade scene exploded in the late 70s and early 80s, which is where everyone began to hang out. People would bring their quarters and try their best to top the leaderboards or just casually play with some friends. Sounds like a flawless way to determine who's the best, right? 1 quarter, 3 lives, do your best? However, if you brought a hefty supply of quarters, you could just keep continuing until you had the highest score. While it was fair, there was still a way to skyrocket above the competition, which of course is unfair. So while the arcade cabinets were accessible to literally everyone with a quarter, the leaderboards were the most accessible to those with more quarters. If you wanted your name literally up in lights, you had to pay the price. Unless of course you were doing perfect runs of Pac-Man, then this point really isn't valid. But let's be honest, that was like 1% of people. But here's the real point. Let's say it took you 100 quarters to get the highest score. Next time it's probably only going to take you 90. Next time 85, and so on. Yes, that's a lot of money to throw away, but you will begin to learn the patterns, learn the enemies, and you will know what to expect. It's classic psychology. Take a study done at the Ohio State University in May of last year. This was done by Dr. Not even going to try to pronounce his name, but it's on screen now, where he says the following, quote, "People in our study aren't just predicting the odds of which photo will show up next, they are learning patterns and developing rules that guide their decision and make them faster and more accurate," end quote. In this study, participants were shown 50 series of 12 images that included various combinations of 3 different photos, a hand, a face, and a landscape. They were all hooked up to an MRI machine that could show brain activity. They were able to determine that the participants could tell if the photos were being shown at random or in a pattern. Furthermore, this isn't just a human trait. If you have taken a psychology class, you know where I'm going with this. Pavlov's dogs. Quick summary on this, if you don't know what this is. Basically, Pavlov presented a stimulus, let's say the ringing of a bell, and then fed a dog. He then noticed the dog would begin to salivate in response to the bell. This, of course, is called classical conditioning, and is the simplest form of pattern recognition as 2 stimuli are paired together. Also setting up for one of my favorite jokes of all time. I went to the library to get a book for Pavlov's dog and Schrodinger's cat. The librarian told me it rang a bell, but she wasn't sure if it was there or not. Moving on. What does this have to do with accessibility, I hear you cry? Well, it's like this. The 1% of people I was talking about earlier, the ones that can play a perfect game of Pac-Man, they have memorized the patterns, and it took them years, which is probably obvious, mind you, but that's what happened at arcades back in the day. People memorized patterns to be the best. There was no problem with accessibility until you were talking about the leaderboards. I promise this comes full circle, just stick with me here. Let's jump ahead to the SNES and Sega Genesis era. Why am I skipping the other areas? Atari and the regular Nintendo? Because most of those games were broken, and hard difficulty was due to poor development and other issues. I'm looking at you, Zelda 2. The SNES era really opened up what video games could be. kids games, mature games, hard games, etc. Some games were extremely hard for its time, Mega Man for example, and pushed gamers to their limits, especially if it was their first console. This was about the time developers learned what the hardcore gamers wanted, a challenge. If you want proof, just look 3 years ahead to the release of the original Doom. Some would call it the shooter that started it all, and this game had multiple difficulties. The developer wanted to reach a wide variety of fans, from the I'm too young to die difficulty all the way to the nightmare difficulty. The game was accessible to any level of gamer. This of course wasn't the first game to offer different difficulties, but it was the one that was popular enough to start a conversation about having difficulty levels for every other game out there, thus sparking this argument, where every single game should be accessible to everyone, which of course is impossible. However, developers have found some sneaky ways to get pretty close. Let's dive in. There's something called a difficulty adjuster in some video games, and I'm really not going to dive deep into this, but basically if you hit a wall and die a lot to the same enemy or in the same spot, the game will adjust for this and make it slightly easier every time. MatPat's new game theory video does an amazing job covering this, giving you examples from Crash Bandicoot, Resident Evil, Bioshock, etc. I highly suggest you watch it as it's incredibly informative if you don't understand what I'm talking about. These techniques open up the harder difficulty of most games to other players, some who aren't very good at the types of games they are playing. Games want to be more accessible. They want the player to be the hero, to be the best. Developers know this and they have found great ways to hide it. Now let's get to the points that made sense that my friend was throwing at me. We'll call him Marcus. What about disabled gamers? What about someone who doesn't have the time to memorize patterns? What about gamers who just want to experience the story? I promise I'm going to connect all these points into a single conclusion, although it seems unlikely. Everything is connected.
Tied to the darkness, soon to be completely eclipsed.
So let's tackle these one at a time. What about disabled gamers? Microsoft has released a controller just for gamers with disabilities. You have seen it in commercials, ads, and on screen now. It's an incredible device that once again widens the gap and makes it so anyone can be a gamer. Now I'm going to tread lightly here as I don't want my subscription base to get Thanos snapped in half because of something I said. There's a YouTuber by the handle Limitless Squad. He's a quadriplegic gamer who has beat the final boss in Sekiro with a regular controller. Didn't even use the one Microsoft made for gamers like him. He's a true testament of what it means to get good. Proof that disabilities won't stop gamers from completing the hardest of games. Marcus 0 points, Charity Gamer 1. The next one. What about someone who doesn't have the time to memorize patterns? Memorize patterns does take some time, I'll give you that. Marcus 1 point, Charity Gamer 1 point. What about gamers who just want to experience the story? The story is not what makes a Souls game a Souls game. Sekiro is the first in the Souls series to offer a story free of YouTube videos, item descriptions, and hours of lore hunting to understand. Before Sekiro, Dark Souls was played for the tough difficulty, not its story. It was nice to understand if you're willing to deep dive, but that's not why Dark Souls succeeded. It succeeded in offering players a true challenge of skill. That was its selling point. It literally made its success on killing players hundreds, if not thousands of times. Also, the games before Sekiro were very dark. Not that Sekiro doesn't still have the dark tone, but it's not on the level as the Dark Souls series of games. In Sekiro, you're more likely to be fighting man than a monster. Sekiro is a more grounded version of the Souls formula. It's a story-driven narrative that people want to experience, but feel like they can't unless they master it. However, is the experience the same if you don't master it? I want that point above Marcus, so I better be able to prove it. Let me offer a social experiment to prove my point. You got an A on a test, but you copied all the answers. You got an A on the test, but you studied all night. Which one is more satisfying? The second option, right? Same result, but yet a more satisfying experience. Software games are like that. If you lower the difficulty, you lose the satisfaction of killing bosses in this game. And there is no feeling like killing a boss in a Souls game. Which before Sekiro was the best part. Now since the story is the main focus, everyone wants a slice. But if you really just want to experience the story, there's also YouTube. My main point is this. If you lower the difficulty, you ruin the experience for the gamer. Marcus 1 point, Charity Gamer 2. However, I really haven't gotten to my point, have I? How am I going to combine all the stuff I've been teaching you into one mind-blowing fact? Let's find out. Basically, I've made 4 points. Number 1. Patterns are recognizable by humans and they adapt to said patterns. While it is not a human trait, it is done much better by humans. Number 2. Most, keyword most, developers want gamers to feel like the hero and add sneaky ways to make the game easier, even on harder difficulties. Number 3. Making the game easier doesn't mean you will enjoy the game. Number 4. I beat Marcus. He is defeated. Even Roger could have beat him in an argument. I shall have songs made of my victory. Just kidding. I love you, Marcus. While the 4th point is for me, the 3 are connected if you look closely enough. By psychology. Developers want you to succeed and have more fun. You as a human are designed to figure out how patterns work, not only in video games but in life. And as a human, you want a challenge to be satisfying. Sekiro doesn't need an easy mode because you don't want it to have one. You want the challenge and the satisfaction that comes with overcoming said challenge. While adding an easy mode may help you get an A in Sekiro, would it really be worth it? This seems like a Sekiro problem more than an accessibility problem, I hear you cry once more. But I think I have proven that this is every aspect of life. Would life be worth going through if we didn't struggle? If everything we ever wanted was just handed to us? Of course not. Sekiro, like most things in life, are accessible to everyone. You just have to be willing to put in the effort. As always, guys, thanks for watching. The charity of the month is in the description. I have my GoFundMe page and a link to their direct site if you'd rather donate through there. If you like what you saw, why not subscribe? I try to upload weekly videos to make sure you guys have some fresh content. So make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you guys next time. Software games are like that. If you lower the difficulty, you lose the satisfaction. You don't need no satisfaction. That's not the word. Fuck.